Hi guys. Okay, so I am back. You are going to need your Walk Two Moons book. I am recording, so because I'm going to be reading this my second period class as well, or sorry, my second class, and I would like to not have to read it twice so I can save my voice. So just when we start to read, if you could go on black so I'm not showing your face, and then that way you also get good audio. So the book starts off a little bit slow. It's not too bad, but it gets really good pretty quickly. And we're just going to start today. We're not going to do any of the activities with it today. We are going to have activities, of course, but not today. Today we're just going to start. Okay. So hopefully you have your books out. We're just going to start, and I'm going to start reading. If you need something, now's the time to ask instead of interrupting in the middle of it. And if you cannot hear, I think you will be able to hear much better because your screens will be on black. But if you can't hear, of course, you can let me know. And let's see what time it is. We are running really late today. 9:48. No, we're not running late. A little bit. Just a little couple minutes. Okay. Any questions before we start about this, language arts? And Andrew, did you ever get your book?
Oh, yeah, I have it right here.
Okay, great. I'm so glad. Thank you. Tell your parents thanks for going and getting it. Jack, did you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
My Walk Two Moons book is actually at my dad's house right now, and I'm at my mom's house.
Okay, well, can you just listen? Are you okay doing that? Like, are you an audio learner? Can you get this?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. It's better if you can follow along. Your comprehension will be better. But if you're okay with it, I trust that it's a sixth grade level book, so you will all be fine with this. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm just going to turn my video off now too, so that we can all. Actually, I'm going to put up a different screen for my other class, just because that way they can. Let's see. Let's put up the color blue images. Let's look at this. There we go, blue screen. Okay. Like I said, if you cannot hear me, it's okay to unmute and let me know. But I'm hoping that you'll all be able to hear well. And I'm going to stop and ask questions along the way. That's just what I do. Whoops, my blue went away. Here we go. I'm just going to leave it there, I guess. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, Face at the Window. Graham says that I'm a country girl at heart, and that is true. I have lived most of my 13 years in By Banks, Kentucky, which is not much more than a cahoodle of houses roosting in a green spot along the Ohio River. Just over a year ago, my father plucked me up like a weed and took me all of our belongings. No, that is not true. He did not bring the chestnut tree, the willow, the maple, the hayloft, or the swimming hole, which all belonged to me. And we drove 300 miles straight north and stopped in front of a house in Euclid, Ohio. No trees? I said. This is where we're going to live? No, my father said. This is Margaret's house. The front door of the house opened, and a lady with wild red hair stood there. I looked up and down the street. The houses were all jammed together like a row of birdhouses. In front of each house was a tiny square of grass, and in front of that was a tiny gray sidewalk running alongside a gray road. Where's the barn? I asked. The river, the swimming hole. Oh, Sal, my father said, come on. There's Margaret. He waved to the lady at the door. We have to go back. I forgot something. The lady with the wild red hair opened the door and came out onto the porch. In the back of my closet, I said, under the floorboards. I put something there, and I've got to have it. Don't be a goose. Come and see Margaret. I did not want to see Margaret. I stood there looking around, and that's when I saw the face pressed up against the upstairs window next door. It was a round girl's face, and it looked afraid. I didn't know it then, but that face belonged to Phoebe Winterbottom, a girl who had a powerful imagination, who would become my friend, and who would have many peculiar things happen to her. Not long ago, when I was locked in a car with my grandparents for 6 days, I told them the story of Phoebe. And when I finished telling them, or maybe even as I was telling them, I realized the story of Phoebe was like the plaster wall in our old house in Bybanks, Kentucky. My father started chipping away at the plaster wall in the living room of our house in Bybanks. Shortly after my mother left us one April morning, our house was an old farmhouse that my parents had been restoring room by room. Each night, as he waited to hear from my mother, he chipped away at the wall. On the night that we got the bad news that she was not returning, he pounded and pounded on that wall with a chisel and a hammer. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he came up to my room. I was not asleep. He led me downstairs and showed me what he had found. Hidden behind the wall was a brick fireplace. The reason that Phoebe's story reminds me of that plaster wall and the hidden fireplace is that beneath Phoebe's story was another one, mine. Okay, so I would like to stop here for 1 second and ask a couple questions. Guys, I also need to know who's read this book. I forgot to ask. Put your hand up in the chat if you already know you've read the whole thing. I know I already asked, but I forgot to write it down. So we've got Owen and Viviana. Is that it? Oh, I also want to ask you guys not to read ahead. I know that's asking a lot for this class, but just save this. This is a really good book. Just save it because it's something special that we can do together. And it's really good. It gets so good. So save it. I know it's going to be hard, but have some self-control. Don't read the book ahead of time, please. Hold on 1 second. Now's not a good time, okay? I love you. All right, so what I wanted to ask was, who is the woman with the wild red hair? And I want you to really think about that. She plays a big part in the story, and you can infer. You've read enough books to maybe know. So what are some guesses? I'm going to make some posters for you guys. You'll only be able to see one at a time, but I have all the poster stuff here, and I want to take your guesses because it's really fun to see who got it right at the beginning, who got it wrong, etc. So let's just take really quick guesses. Aiden?
Her aunt.
Okay, thank you. Jack?
Margaret.
Who is Margaret?
The woman in the wild red hair.
Sorry, I guess I'm not asking. Who is she okay, so think of how Sal, I don't think they said her name yet, the main character is acting toward Margaret. So who might she be in their lives? So maybe she's her aunt. Who else? Who else might she be? Lydia?
She could be a close family friend.
Okay, thank you. And Luke?
I think that Margaret might be her old mom who broke up with her dad.
Okay, thank you. And Sophia and Olivia, and then we're going to stop it there. So Sophia and Olivia?
I think Margaret is her dad's new girlfriend.
Dad's new girlfriend. Thank you. And last, we've got, wasn't that Sophia who just said that? Who didn't I get? Okay, that's it. I think Olivia. Oh, maybe Olivia had the same answer. Okay, thanks, guys. We're going to keep going. Okay, chapter 2. The Chickabiddy starts a story. It was after all the adventures of Phoebe that my grandparents came up with a plan to drive from Kentucky to Ohio, where they could pick me up, and then the three of us would drive 2,000 miles west to Lewiston, Idaho. This is how I came to be locked in a car with them for nearly a week. It was not a trip that I was eager to take, but it was one I had to take. Gramps had said, "We'll see the whole ding-dong country." Graham squeezed my cheeks and said, "This trip will give me a chance to be with my favorite chickabiddy." Again, I am, by the way, their only chickabiddy. My father said that Graham couldn't read maps worth a hill of beans, and that he was grateful that I had agreed to go along to help them find their way. I was only 13, and although I did have a way with maps, it was not really because of that. It was not really because of that skill I was going, nor was it to see the whole ding-dong country that Graham and Gramps were going. The real reasons were buried beneath piles and piles of unsaid things. Some of the real reasons were: 1, Graham and Gramps wanted to see Mama, who was resting peacefully in Lewiston, Idaho. 2, Graham and Gramps knew I wanted to see Mama, but that I was afraid to. And 3, Dad wanted to be alone with the red-headed Margaret cadaver. He had already seen Mama, and he had not taken me. Also, although this wasn't as important, Dad did not trust Graham and Gramps to behave themselves along the way unless they had me with them. Dad said that if they tried to go on their own, he would save everyone a lot of time and embarrassment by calling the police and having them arrested before they even left the driveway. It might sound a bit extreme for a man to call the police on his own tottery old parents, but when my grandparents got in the car, trouble naturally followed them like a filly trailing behind a mare. My grandparents, Hiddle, were my father's parents, full up to the tops of their heads with goodness and sweetness, and mixed in with all that goodness and sweetness was a large dash of peculiarity. This combination made them interesting to know, but you could never predict what they would do or say. So think of your own grandparents and see if they're a little like that. Are they filled with goodness and sweetness and sometimes peculiarity? Maybe you have grandparents like hers. Once it was settled that the three of us would go, the journey took on an alarming, expanding need to hurry that was like a walloping great thundercloud assembling around me. During the week before we left, the sound of the wind was hurry, hurry, hurry. And at night, even the silent darkness whispered, rush, rush, rush. I did not think we would ever leave, and yet I did not want to leave. I did not really expect to survive the trip. But I had decided to go, and I would go, and I had to be there by my mother's birthday. This was extremely important. I believed that if there was any chance to bring my mother back home, it would happen on her birthday. If I had said this aloud to my father or to my grandparents, they would have said that I might as well try to catch a fish in the air. So I did not say it aloud, but I believed it. Sometimes I am as ornery and stubborn as an old donkey. My father says I lean on broken reeds and will get a face full of swamp mud one day. I think a lot of teenagers are. Maybe some of you guys are already at that stage, but if you have teenagers in the house, you understand what they mean about ornery and stubborn, okay? When at last Graham and Gramps Hiddle and I set out the first day of the trip, I prayed for the first 30 minutes solid. I prayed that we would not be in an accident. I was terrified of cars and buses, and that we would get there by my mother's birthday, 7 days away, and that we would bring her home. Over and over, I prayed the same thing. I prayed to the trees. This was easier than praying directly to God. There was nearly always a tree nearby. As we pulled onto the Ohio Turnpike, which is the flattest, straightest piece of road in God's whole creation, Graham interrupted my prayers. Salamanca? I should explain right off that my real name is Salamanca Tree Hiddle. Salamanca, my parents thought, was the name of an Indian tribe to which my great-great-grandmother belonged. My parents were mistaken. The name of the tribe was Seneca, but since my parents did not discover their error until after I was born, and they were by then used to my name, it remained Salamanca. My middle name, Tree, comes from your basic tree, a thing of such beauty to my mother that she made it part of my name. She wanted to be more specific and used sugar maple tree, her favorite, but Salamanca sugar maple tree Hiddle was a bit much even for her. My mother used to call me Salamanca, but after she left, only my grandparents Hiddle called me Salamanca when they were not calling me Chickabiddy. To most other people, I was Sal, and to a few boys who thought they were especially amusing, I was Salamander. In the car, as we started our long journey to Lewiston, Idaho, my grandmother Hiddle said, Salamanca, why don't you entertain us? What sort of thing do you have in mind? Gramps said, how about a story? Spin us a yarn. I certainly do know heaps of stories, but I learned most of them from Gramps. Gramps suggested I tell one about my mother. That I could not do. I had just reached the point where I could stop thinking about her every minute of every day. Gramps said, well then, what about your friends? You got any tales to tell about them? Instantly, Phoebe Winterbottom came to mind. There was certainly a hog's belly full of things to tell about her. I could tell you an extensively strange story, I warned. Oh, good, Graham said. Delicious. And that is how I happened to suspend my tree prayers and tell them about Phoebe Winterbottom, her disappearing mother, and the lunatic. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second. I don't always stop in the middle, but I just want to check in. Any questions about chapters 1 or 2? Okay, well, let's keep going then. What time is it? Okay, we have time. Chapter 3, Bravery. Because I first saw Phoebe on the day my father and I moved to Euclid, I began my story of Phoebe with the visit to the red-headed Margaret Cadavers, where I also met Mrs. Partridge, her elderly mother. Margaret nearly fell over herself being nice to me. "What lovely hair," she said, "and aren't you sweet?" I was not sweet that day. I was being particularly ornery. I wouldn't sit down and I wouldn't look at Margaret. As we were leaving, Margaret whispered to my father, "John, have you told her yet how we met?" My father looked uncomfortable. "No," he said. I tried, but she doesn't want to know." Now that was the truth. Absolutely. Who cares, I thought. Who cares how he met Margaret Cadaver? When at last we left Mrs. Cadavers and Mrs. Partridge, we drove for approximately 3 minutes. 2 blocks from Margaret Cadavers was the place where my father and I were now going to live. Tiny squirt trees, little birdhouses in a row, and one of those birdhouses was ours. No swimming hole, no barn, no cows, no chickens, no pigs. Instead, a little white house with a miniature patch of green grass in front of it. It wasn't enough grass to keep a cow alive for 5 minutes. "Let's take a tour," my father said, rather too heartily. We walked through the tiny living room, into the miniature kitchen, and upstairs into my father's pint-sized bedroom, and on into my pocket-sized bedroom, and into the wee bathroom. I looked out the upstairs window down into the backyard. Half of the tiny yard was a cement patio, and the other half was another patch of grass that our imaginary cow would devour in 2 bites. There was a tall wooden fence all around the yard, and to the left and right of our yard were other identical fenced plots. So I just want you guys to think, a lot of us, that's where I used to live in Roseville. Like, my house was seriously just like this, a tiny little yard. All of our houses looked exactly the same. So this paragraph always makes me laugh because it reminds me of some parts of Roseville. After the moving van arrived and 2 men crammed our By-Banks furniture into our birdhouse, my father and I inched into the living room. Sorry, my book is different than yours, so my pages are different, so I had to turn the page. So, inched into our living room, crawling over sofas and chairs and tables and boxes. My father said, "It looks as if we've tried to squeeze all the animals into the chicken coop." 3 days later, I started school. Okay, let's stop for a second because I want to, obviously, you guys can get the tone. Tone is the way that the author sets up the way that a person, a character is feeling. So what tone are you getting from her about her new area? What does she think about it?
Negative one.
Yeah, she's very negative. Lydia?
She's really annoyed and doesn't want to be there.
Yeah. She wants her mom. She wants to be with her mom. She doesn't care about any of that.
I also have a question.
Go ahead. And then Sophia, you're next.
I just need to kind of clarify something. So she moved somewhere, and then she lived there for a while, and then she got in the car with her grandparents, and then drove away and told them the story about where they were living.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forget to tell you guys that. Exactly, Lydia. You've got it. So this story goes back and forth in time constantly. So anytime that the entire story takes place in the past, the entire story does. But within that story, it jumps from 2 different times. So it goes to the car ride, which is actually still in the past, because if you notice in the beginning, she's saying that she was stuck in the car with her grandparents for a week. But that's the car ride. And then she goes into the farther past, which would be anytime she was with Phoebe, her friends, or school, or Margaret, or anything. So there's two different times: the grandparents and her, and then the school and her friends and Idaho and all of that. Okay, do you guys understand that? I'm hoping you do, because it'll make more sense as we read, but it's going to jump back and forth in time for sure. Sophia?
I feel like she's annoyed, she might be mad even, and she's very disappointed. Her house isn't like her old one where it had lots of trees, lots of grass, lots of wildlife. But now she has to adapt to a crammed, very big area where there's so much people, and barely any grass, no. It's not like her old place.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And also, I would just say, basically, there's no nature. And that's what she's used to. So, yeah, exactly what you described, Sophia. And imagine that your mother leaves. That's hard enough to imagine. She decides that she's leaving and doesn't come back. And then your dad takes you to live in a whole different place. You would be very angry too. I think a lot of kids at the beginning kind of don't like Sal. And I think we would all act like that if that happened to us, every one of us. So she's just looking at all the bad stuff. She doesn't want to talk to Margaret. She doesn't want to know how they met. She doesn't care about their house. She's saying it's tiny. And she calls them birdhouses, which they kind of are if you're not used to that. So exactly. Thanks, Sophia. Okay, we're going to continue, and then for just a few more minutes.
Miss Mangle?
You can't watch anything right now. Yes.
So the houses she's describing are kind of like the new houses being built by Diamond Creek.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to live in the houses by the other middle school right there. What is that school called? Chilton. And we had just seriously a little tiny patch of grass in the front yard. Actually, we didn't have grass at all. We didn't even have front yards. It was those homes where you walk up and there's a little porch and it leads right onto the street. And we had a tiny little backyard. The house was big. It was big-ish. But we didn't have, so that's what it always makes me think of. It's those houses, like the brand new houses are pretty much like that. She would consider any of our houses like that though, because they lived on a ton of land. But yeah, you can think of it more like that. Okay, so we're going to read, where are we? Sorry, I had to stop at the 3 days later, right? Yeah. Okay. One second. Esau, can you take her outside? Okay, play with her for a little and pet her. Okay. 3 days later, I started school and saw Phoebe again. She was in my class. Most of the kids in my new school spoke in quick, sharp bursts and dressed in stiff new clothes and wore braces on their teeth. Most girls wore their hair in exactly the same way, in a shoulder-length bob. That's what they called it, with long bangs. And they repeatedly shook out their hair. Shook out of their eyes. We once had a horse who did that. Everybody kept touching my hair. "Don't you ever cut it?" they said. "Can you sit on it? How do you wash it? Is it naturally black like that? Do you use conditioner?" I couldn't tell if they liked my hair or if they thought I looked like a wang doodle. One girl, Mary Lou Finney, said the most peculiar things, like out of the blue she would say omnipotent or beef brain. I couldn't make any sense of it. There were Megan and Christy, who jumped up and down like parched peas, moody Beth Ann, and pink-cheeked Alex. There was Ben, who drew cartoons all day long, and a peculiar English teacher named Mr. Birkway. And then there was Phoebe Winterbottom. Ben called her Freebie Icebottom and drew a picture of a bumblebee with an ice cube on its bottom. Phoebe tore it up. Phoebe was a quiet girl who stayed mostly by herself. She had a pleasant round face and huge, enormous sky blue eyes. Around this pleasant round face, her hair, as yellow as a crow's foot, curled in short ringlets. During that first week, when my father and I were at Margaret's, we ate dinner there 3 times that week. I saw Phoebe's face twice more at her window. Once I waved at her, but she did not seem to notice, and at school she never mentioned that she had seen me. Then one day at lunch, she slid into the seat next to me and said, "Sal, you're so courageous. You're ever so brave." To tell you the truth, I was surprised. You could have knocked me over with a chicken feather. Me? I'm not brave, I said. You are. You are brave. I was not. I, Salamanca Tree Hiddle, was afraid of lots and lots of things. For example, I was terrified of car accidents, death, cancer, brain tumors, nuclear war, pregnant women, loud noises, strict teachers, elevators, and scads of other things. But I was not afraid of spiders, snakes, and wasps. Phoebe and nearly everyone else in my new class did not have much fondness for these creatures. But on that day, when a dignified black spider was investigating my desk, I cupped my hands around it, carried it to the open window, and set it outside on the ledge. Mary Lou Finney said, "Alpha and Omega! Will you look at that?" Beth Ann was as white as milk. All around the room, people were acting as if I had single-handedly taken on a fire-breathing dragon. What I have since realized is that if people expect you to be brave, sometimes you pretend that you are, even when you are frightened down to your very bones. But this was later, during the whole thing with Phoebe's lunatic, that I realized this. At this point in my story, Graham interrupted me to say, "Why, Salamanca, of course you're brave. All the Hiddles are brave. It's a family trait. Look at your daddy, your mama." "Mama's not a real Hiddle," I said. "She practically is," Graham said. "You can't be married to a Hiddle with that long and not become a Hiddle." That is not what my father used to say. My mother used to say. She would tell my father, "You Hiddles are a mystery to me. I'll never be a true Hiddle." She did not say this proudly. She said it as if she were sorry about it, as if it were some sort of failing in her. My mother's parents, my other set of grandparents, are Pickfords, and they are as unlike my grandparents' Hiddle as a donkey is unlike a pickle. Grandmother and grandfather Pickford stand straight up, as if sturdy steel poles ran down their backs. They wear starched, ironed clothing, and when they are shocked or surprised, which is often, they say, "Really? Is that so?" And their eyes open wide and their mouths turn down at the corners. Once I asked my mother why grandmother and grandfather Pickford never laughed. My mother said, "Well, they're just so busy being respectable. It takes a lot of concentration to be that respectable." And then my mother laughed and laughed in a gentle way, and you could tell her own spine was not made of steel, because she bent in half laughing and laughing. My mother said that grandmother Pickford's one act of defiance in her whole life as a Pickford was in naming her. Grandmother Pickford, whose own name is Gayfeather, named my mother Chanhassen. It's an Indian name meaning tree sweet juice, or in other words, maple sugar. Only Grandmother Pickford ever called my mother by her Indian name, though. Everyone else called my mother Sugar. Most of the time, my mother seemed nothing like her parents at all, and it was hard for me to imagine that she had come from them. But occasionally, in small, unexpected moments, the corners of my mother's mouth would turn down, and she would say, "Really? Is that so?" and sound exactly like a Pickford. So, like in most books, there's a ton of foreshadowing going on here. I just want you to kind of put that in the back of your mind. And foreshadowing is when they give you clues as to what's going to happen later in the story. I think one of the big clues, and we'll have to come back to this later, is, and I'm not going to give them all away, but the way the mother feels about herself. Kind of pay attention to that. They're going to drop those clues all along the way. So we already know that she doesn't think she's as good as the Hiddles. That's an important fact to know, okay? I hope you guys like it so far. It just gets better and better and better. Do you have anything you want to add? Any questions, any thoughts, any guesses, anything at all before we stop for the day? Okay. So we're going to start making a